You actually think you are some sort of great individual. And Saul and his whole army were coming back after a great victory. This was a tremendous victory over the Philistines. And the women were lined up in Jerusalem to invite their soldiers, their husbands, their fathers, many of them young women between the ages of 15 and 25. And this wasn't just a 100-voice choir. This was thousands of voices. And they had practiced and gotten ready for this grand event. And they were wanting to honor the all-star of that battle. And so as the gates opened up and they began to march in, here they were singing in perfect harmony, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Now, was it those women's desire to cause Saul to feel small? It wasn't their desire to do that. Now, if I would have been advising them, knowing Saul as my patient, I probably would have advised for them to choose some different lyrics in this process. But they didn't know what was going on in Saul's mind. They didn't realize some of those emotional issues that was leading up to this point, and they were just wanting to honor the all-star. And they thought that Saul would be proud by saying, yes, he's on my team, and I chose him to lead in this battle. And so they thought Saul would actually well up with pride in regards to having this young soldier, David, as part of it. But nonetheless, when they sang it again, first he wasn't sure he heard it right. And then when they sang it again, it became clear. And his pride was wounded. There's a book written by Dr. William Backus. He's a clinical psychologist, but he's also a Lutheran minister. And he wrote a book, What Your Counselor Never Told You, The 7 Sins That Lead to Mental Illness. And the first sin that he mentions that leads to mental illness, anyone want to guess what it is? It's the sin of pride. And then he gives you a test to see whether you might have it. By the way, magnification of self was not unique to Saul. If you remember, this man is not this great Babylon which I have built. Did Nebuchadnezzar have emotional problems? His emotional problems were so severe, it took more than a 10-day program for him to get over it. How long was Nebuchadnezzar's program? It was 7 years. And the first thing the Lord did was put him on a plant-based vegetarian diet. The second thing he did was make him exercise. In fact, if he wanted to eat, he was going to have to exercise. And if you read the text, it's very clear he also received hydrotherapy as part of that program. But what finally helped Nebuchadnezzar was the cognitive behavioral therapy of getting rid of his distorted thoughts about himself. Did the program work? It worked wonderfully. In fact, Nebuchadnezzar became a converted man as a result. Another one. I will exalt myself above the Most High. That was Lucifer. And unfortunately, although Lucifer was given opportunities to correct this distorted thought, he never did. And he uses this as a temptation to try to wrest others from the Lord Jesus. Well, back to William Backus, this little test, or symptoms of pride that he mentions, trying to be noticed. Have you wondered why the jewelry industry has exploded, why the tattoo industry has exploded, why these types of things are becoming much more commonplace? Underneath it often is trying to be noticed or craving attention, itching for compliments, needing to be important, detesting the idea of being submissive, loathing the idea of admitting to wrongdoing, strongly opinionated, being argumentative, demanding your way, wanting control over others. Now, we want to have a positive influence over others, but never should we want control over others. But those with pride want to have control over others and often demand their own way, flaunting your individual rights, refusing advice, being critical yet resenting criticism, being oversensitive, and finally, thinking you have excellences you don't have. Now, what William Backus says is watch out. If you have particularly one or more than one of these, pride is there, and wounded pride is going to follow, and emotional problems are coming your way. In contrast, we have someone in the Bible who could have had a lot of pride, in fact, had far more reason than Saul, but yet he took a different course. The book Desire of Ages, the biography of Christ, says Christ was never elated by applause. Why was he never elated by applause? He never developed this sense of self-pride or egotism. Now, she goes on to say, Christ was not only never elated by applause, but he was never dejected by censure or disappointment. By the way, those two are connected. If you're never going to be elated by applause, you're not going to be dejected by censure or disappointment. In fact, she goes on to say, amid the greatest opposition and the most cruel treatment, he was still of good courage. Are you getting an idea why emotional intelligence is very important in regards to success and thinking accurately? Well, others have figured this out as well. This is actually one of the founders of our country in America. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, and he was the founder of the Democratic Party, Thomas Jefferson, but he said, nothing gives one person so much advantage over another as to remain cool and unruffled under all circumstances. Now, the only way you can do that is if you don't allow magnification to take hold. Now, there is an issue. When people start to lose their temper, they believe that there's something happening in front of them that they absolutely cannot stand. We call it I can't stand-itis. And you know, there's only one thing a human being cannot stand, actually, that is accurate, and that is death. Everything else they actually can stand. But if they tell themselves they can't stand it, that's when emotions get out of control, that's when anger starts to erupt, and that's when even a person that might have a PhD from Harvard looks very dumb. There's a song that we teach our people that come to the depression and anxiety recovery program. In fact, we teach them that the first night. We actually do hydrotherapy on our patients. We call it natural shockwave treatments. They're put in a nice warm tub, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, for several minutes, and then they're put in cold water, 55 degrees Fahrenheit. They're there for about a minute, and they contrast. And studies show it actually does improve the brain chemistry, like electroshock treatments, but without any of the side effects from it. And many of them think that first time they're going into hydro that they're not going to be able to stand it. In fact, it was interesting. We just completed a program before I came here. And we have, of course, depression has no age barriers. So we had young people in there, 18-year-olds, and we had 25-year-olds, and we had 45-year-olds. And they all have a little different response to hydrotherapy. Some love it the first time. But I remember our 18-year-old coming to me, and she says, if you were there earlier today, you know why we do this, but we take away their internet, their computers, their cell phones. They can't use them, but maybe for 30 minutes a day at the right time. And so this was a girl who was hooked on entertainment TV and all of the YouTube videos and all of this. That was part of her issue. But she said after the third day, she says, you know what? I'm not missing that because I'm being entertained by hydro. I said, I said, what do you mean? She says, these are women that have had babies. And you would think that it's the worst thing in the world when they get into the cold, the screaming and all of the things that they're saying and all of that. And she says, it's absolutely funny. I mean, of course they can stand it. But anyways, the song that we teach them is just very simple. I don't like it, I don't like it, it's okay, I can stand it anyway, I can stand it anyway, I'm all right, I'm all right. And that little song sometimes is a good reminder from us when we think we can't stand something, we can just sing that song. I don't like it, but I can stand it anyway. In fact, watch out for the I can't stand it-itis that is present in your life. Saul ended up having a lot of those. That's why with rage, he would try to pin David to the wall, thinking that he couldn't stand the fact that he was going to be the next king. But Ellen White says this in the book Christ Object Lessons. When trials arise that seem unexplainable, we should not allow our peace to be spoiled. When trials arise that seem unexplainable, we should not allow what to be spoiled? Our peace. However unjustly we may be treated, let not passion arise. By indulging in a spirit of retaliation, who do we injure? We injure ourselves. We destroy our own confidence in God and grieve the Holy Spirit. Well, when Saul underwent the recommended therapy for depression, he would feel better again for a while. Do you remember what his recommended therapy was? It was music therapy. And what type of instrument was used? The harp, it actually does work very well for depression and anxiety recovery. One of the reasons it works well is no matter how hard you try, you cannot play it too loud. In addition, it can be done in a lot of good melodies and nice non-dissonant harmonies. And so the harp, we utilize it in our program. We'll utilize live harp music, and it does help the depression and anxiety, the frontal lobe to be enhanced. It helps your ability to help manage your emotions. And it helped Saul as well, significantly. But unfortunately, in time, with the three causes still active and the third cause, wounded pride, becoming even more prominent, he would slip back into anxiety and depression. He never took care of his distorted thoughts for more than a few days. He would for a few days. I mean, there was a time when David became not only his music therapist, but became his cognitive behavioral therapist. I don't know if you remember the time when he was out there seeking David's life, and David came in the middle of the night and cut off part of his skirt, and then ran over to the hill and started waking up the camp and saying, how did you let me in here? And Abner, you've done treason. You're supposed to protect your king. You didn't protect the king. And here I was able to do this, and I even took his cruse of water from him. And then Saul begins to answer him and says, is this you, David? And then David starts giving him cognitive behavioral therapy. He says, why are you out here searching for me like a dog? He said, what have I done? What have I done? And Saul said, you're exactly right. You don't fear at all. You are right. I am never going to go after you again. How long did that last? It lasted less than 2 weeks. And then he was searching again because he wasn't taking care permanently of his distorted thoughts. Unfortunately, before we get to story number 2, it's good to review the end of story number 1. But Saul, with his distorted thoughts, was under tremendous stress as king. There was a major threat to the nation. And he demanded that the Lord answer him the way he said the Lord should answer him. And by the way, beware of telling the Lord how he should answer you. And then when the Lord didn't answer him the way he thought he should have, and by the way, when the Lord doesn't answer you the way you think he should, that's usually a sign that he's already spoken to you and you're not following his counsel already. Because he doesn't have much more to say if you're not following the counsel already. And so that was a good review check for Saul. But instead, he ended up consulting the wrong source. And he went to the wrong source, who totally discouraged him that anything could get better. And of course, although he put a lot of truth, the devil always puts a lot of truth with error. The error was that Saul still had an opportunity to turn around. And what I've realized, if there's life, there's hope. And we realize this with people with severe depression and anxiety who've had multiple suicide attempts. If we are able to get them alive, there is significant hope that they can be turned around. But instead, Saul's hopes were dashed. And with his enemies closing in on him, how did his life end? It was actually suicide. An unnecessary death had he taken care of the cognitive distortions that were causing his problem. Story number 2, not too many generations further. The distortion here is called emotional reasoning. Now, a little bit of what emotional reasoning is. Emotional reasoning goes like this: I feel like a dud, therefore I am a dud. I feel overwhelmed and helpless, thus my problems are impossible to solve. And we get a lot of people with severe depression coming to me saying, my depression is much more severe than what you've ever seen before. And my problem is totally hopeless. It is impossible to solve. Sometimes I have to reason with them and say, do you think, and often they think I'm talking about myself, but I don't put any names there. I say, do you think the biggest expert in the world in depression might not know something about it? And they'll say, yeah, I think that's probably true. The biggest expert in the world, it's probably true that there's something that they don't know about it. I said, I would grant you that that is true. But if the biggest expert in the world doesn't know something about depression, is it possible that you don't know something about depression? And what you don't know might actually help in your recovery process. And at that point, they usually say, okay, I'm open. We'll see if this is going to work or not. But you can also have emotional reasoning this way. I feel on top of the world, thus I am invincible. And emotional reasoning will get to the point where when you start feeling bad, you will look for short fixes to try to get your emotions feeling better again. The one who had emotional reasoning and got into significant emotional issues writes his story in Ecclesiastes. He says, I said in mine heart, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth, therefore do what? Enjoy pleasure. What he said is, if I see someone else doing something and it makes them feel good and they're happy, then I'm going to try it so I can see what it feels like. And then, okay, someone else is doing something, I'm going to try that. And so it's clear. He tried alcohol. He tried the drugs of his day, opium. And then he said this, whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy. What is this talking about? This is actually talking about the sin that's become very commonplace today, called the sin of pornography. But this wasn't just pornography, there was live pornography involved. And whatever would make him feel better for the short term, he would go after. Now notice what happened as a result. Therefore I did what? Hated life for all his vanity and vexation of spirit. Therefore I went about to cause my heart to despair. When people go into emotional reasoning and look for quick fixes, they will do it to get high at first, but the more they do it, the less high they get. And in between times, the brain chemistry goes down to the basement when there's nothing sad about them, and now they're doing it just to get numb, to feel calm. And that is a despicable place to be, because these people can't get a lot of joy and satisfaction out of a beautiful, nice walk. They can't get joy and satisfaction out of watching a beautiful sunset. They might get just a little bit, and someone else will talk about how wonderful this is, and they're thinking, boy, it's not doing anything to me. And that's a sign of the complications of emotional reasoning. Ellen White, in the book Conflict and Courage, says, "Many envied the popularity and abundant glory of Solomon, thinking that of all men he must be the